Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I am Dr. Kymyona Burk, Senior Policy Fellow for Early Literacy at ExcelinEd. Previously, I served as the State Literacy Director for the Mississippi Department of Education. We're thrilled to have policymakers and education stakeholders from across the country joining us today. At ExcelinEd, we believe that policy changes lives. And today we get to hear firsthand how Mississippi turned the page on literacy through the state's Literacy-Based Promotion Act. Before we get started, just a reminder that the lines are muted so we can enjoy a robust discussion among the panelists. But we welcome your questions and hope that you will post them in the Q&A section during this webinar. We will be compiling your questions throughout the webinar and have time planned at the end to answer them. I'd like to introduce you to my co-panelist, Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent of Education of Mississippi from 2013 to 2022. Under Dr. Wright's leadership, the Magnolia State experienced a statewide transformation in standards that led to unprecedented gains in literacy. Moderating today's discussion is ExcelinEd's founder and chairman, the 43rd governor of Florida, and a champion for early literacy, Governor Jeb Bush. So Governor Bush, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Burk. And Dr. Wright, it's such a joy to be on in this discussion with you. And we thank all the people that are still coming in. We have one of our larger audiences for such an important subject. I was governor a long, long time ago. And what I remember about creating a comprehensive early childhood literacy policy and ending social promotion it was really hard. It was very controversial. People were very upset, but we stuck to it, and we ended up getting some significant gains. And then it allowed for Florida to be a model for others. And there's no state that comes close to. In fact, I would say Mississippi's done even more work on this subject that Florida's done than the work that was done by our two panelists today. And I'm honored to be in their presence, because can you think of anything more important? You know, when you think about policies that should not be political, should not be ideological, that can really move the needle to give the next generation the chance to live purposeful lives of purpose and meaning, it would be to make sure that every third grader graduates to fourth grade at grade level in terms of their reading. And you can't start in the middle of the third grade. You can't start in January. You have to develop a pre-K to 3 strategy. And today we're going to hear about how that work unfolded in the state of Mississippi. And so I really appreciate the fact that y'all are here, and let's dig into the Mississippi Miracle, as it's now called. And Dr. Wright, you came to Mississippi right after the law passed. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how the law was passed, but why did you go to Mississippi? Were you there excited about the possibility of implementing this very broad-based law? And what were the critical components that you focused on first?
Well, I went to Mississippi to assume the position of State Superintendent of Education, and realized when I went down there that we were at that time 50th in the nation, but felt that there was much work to be done, and the Literacy-Based Promotion Act had just passed, as well as the Early Learning Collaborative Act at the same time. So you're right, Governor Bush, it was a pre-K through grade 3 strategy that we developed. The beautiful part of the law was that the legislature allowed us to develop the implementation, which I think was really huge for us. So we then started procuring professional development for our teachers that was aligned to the science of reading. We knew that not all of our teachers knew how to teach reading based on the research from the science of reading. So that was one of the key components that we started. We also then hired the best and brightest in terms of our literacy coaches, and Dr. Burk was one of those, and who led this work. And the important part there was that the agency hired these coaches. We did not just simply turn the money over to the districts. We really wanted to control for quality and making sure that they were grounded well in their content. So we hired the coaches and then deployed them based on our data, based on where we knew they were needed the most. We did a whole lot of communicating to teachers, communicating to administrators, parents, communities around the law, because there were so many different components to the law. And we knew that parents and communities in particular would want to know what that was. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then also one of the components that I thought was very important too were the assessments that we administered 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and the end of the year, for all K-3 students, so that we could know at any given point in time, and parents could know at any given point in time, just how children were progressing. So those to me were the key components of that Literacy-Based Promotion Act.
So, Dr. Wright, tell me about, there's always the argument, constant friction between folks that say local control is the mantra, local control is the most important thing, and others that say, let's create a statewide strategy. Mm-hmm. How did you deal? I assume Mississippi is pretty proud of their local communities, and people didn't want to, the folks up in Jackson to tell them what to do. How did you guys build the strategy? Was it state funded? So you weren't like taking money away from I think one of the lessons may be that if you have a reform at the state level, you sure as heck better fund it, or you're not going to get a lot of buy-in, right? I mean, how did that work?
That's exactly right, Governor. The first year they appropriated $9.5 million, and I went back across the street and said, if you really are really taking this seriously, we've got to have more money than just $9.5 million. So that very next year and every year thereafter, they funded us at a $15 million basis. So you're exactly right. It was not coming out of any local district's pockets. But I knew that we needed to have every teacher knowing how to teach the science of reading. I mean, that was just a foundational piece for us, because we had heard from too many superintendents and principals that there were teachers arriving day one that weren't ready to do that. And so we needed to make sure that everybody was grounded in the same language, in the same strategies, and statewide. Now, this did not preclude any local district from conducting its own professional development, but Kymyona and her team really leaned in very heavily statewide, which was the first time we'd done that. I mean, we had dabbled in it a little bit, but from the time we started leaning in on the science of reading until the day I left, quite honestly, and even now, the state is leading in terms of professional development for teachers and administrators.
One other quick question before I ask Dr. Burk her views on this, because she was there from the get-go as well. Was, as I recall, you all had some philanthropy to back this up as well. Did you?
Yes, we did.
How did you all garner the support outside of the political system and school districts and teachers, which is where we normally focus our efforts? How did you turn it into a statewide initiative through philanthropy and other means?
Well, we were really very fortunate. The Barksdale Reading Institute, which was founded by Jim Barksdale, came right alongside us, and they were literally, we worked hip to hip. So they provided some of the professional development, they provided some of the resources that were needed. But the W. Kellogg Foundation also came alongside us as well when we were needing early childhood coaches, to work with our early childhood programming. And so people really, I think, started to embrace this effort as a way to make sure that Mississippi would no longer, through a lot of concentrated effort that we'll talk about, but could no longer be at the bottom. Our children were depending on us. They were depending on us to really make sure that all kids were learning to read. So the Barksdale Reading Institute definitely was a great partner, as was the Kellogg Foundation.
Dr. Burk, you're in ExcelinEd world, you are the CEO of the science. You're spreading the gospel all around the country. I follow you on Twitter, and you're not in Jackson very often, it looks like to me.
Right.
It has garnered a lot of attention based on results of states like Florida and certainly Mississippi. So you were part of the implementation of this law from the beginning. Prior to that, you were serving in the state and district roles, and you were a teacher. So first of all, give me a little bit of your background, and why did you sign up for this mission, and why did you think this was the important time? Because look, in politics, people always have, I mean, how many states have called for ending social promotion? I think there's probably half the states, but then it never happens. There's never a full strategic plan. Why did you think this was different?
Well, I'll say this, my undergraduate degree is in political science, and I'm guessing we're all glad I didn't end up being an attorney. And I went into teaching instead. I taught elementary, middle, high school, and being in a district, we always heard about district expectations, and we were just so disconnected from the state agency. The state agency was seen as an auditing arm. Like if the state comes to your building, then something's wrong. So when this law passed, as Dr. Wright stated, this was really kind of our first state-led effort that really penetrated through the districts and down to the teachers in a very intimate collaboration where we had state literacy coaches in the schools. So for me, I always say that we had what I call the big three. We had a governor who was championing this effort. We had a legislature who was willing to fund it. And then, of course, we had a state chief who was like the idea fairy. And, however we could make this work, then we would make it work, even as far as changing infrastructure within the agency to be able to provide support to the districts and to the schools. And so you mentioned local control. And I'll say this. So Dr. Wright, she doesn't brag on herself that much, but she has these different groups. She has a kind of an administrator, principals council, a teachers council, superintendent's council, and they're able to have this kind of direct access, right? And so it becomes more of a partnership. And I remember being in one meeting where there was a principal that said, just tell us what we need to do. So I think that also there's this notion that local control means I don't want anyone telling me what to do. But for the state agency, we walked in our authority in one sense, and in the other sense, it said, we want children reading by third grade, but we're going to help you get there. And it just changed the perception of the state agency. And so I think that made it just kind of coupled with just the way in which I saw a lot of high school students struggling to read. And I just wondered, how did you get this far without getting what you needed? It just all became just one big passion in a way for me to exercise that.
So, Dr. Burk, you truly are the leader nationally, one of the leaders on the science of reading and its implementation. And I've always wondered, kids that grew up with the 3 Qing strategy and survived all the way through high school, and there are many that did, think about how smart they are. Have you ever thought about it that way? How smart it must be to not really, where every chance you have, you're confronted with a word, you have to figure it out every time because you haven't learned it at the beginning. I marvel at kids that were taught the wrong way to how they survived. It shows that children, I think, are a lot smarter than adults give them credit for. So where did you get your passion for this effort to move to the so-called science of reading, which is based on scientific research about the proper way, the balanced way, if you will, to get kids to read? Because it's really important. And now, I don't need to tell you this, across the country, your work is getting people very excited. Places that, traditionally are pretty status quo driven are moving quickly in this area to realize that, we have a lost generation unless we begin to do this right. Well,
I grew up on Sesame Street and Reading Rainbow. And, I always say I was, grew up in a low income area. And all we need is we have to have teachers who are empowered to do this work. Teachers who are given the opportunity to gain the knowledge, the skills, the things that they need in order to do this work. But when you think about those students who have been taught really kind of the wrong way and have been taught in a disadvantaged way of teaching reading, you're exactly right. It's the skills that they acquire to be able to do that. But then also, I'm sure, a lot of times, the times that they have to spend in order to come up with these ways in order to tackle what it is that they are reading. But I will say this, Governor, I think that Mississippi's success in 2019 kind of sparked interest in some of these states as well.
Sure.
Being the poorest state in the nation, and then being able to, a slow and steady. I think everyone saw this miracle, as it's being called, in 2019, but we were behind the scenes seeing our scores. And I remember Dr. Wright would always say, we're going in the right direction. When we passed the law in 2013, our first NAEP with us together, 2015, we saw some gains, and we just continue to say we're going in the right direction. And it wasn't about this national spotlight on Mississippi. This was about how can we ensure that we change the trajectory of the lives of children in Mississippi. And then all of this national stuff came later, but just with doing the work, with ensuring that our teachers did not feel that they were lacking anything, that they were lacking knowledge, that they were lacking support, that they were lacking those opportunities to reach out and get the additional support that they needed. That just became our mission, because those who are on the ground, we can sit around, and talk policy and talk these things all day, but how can we support our educators and our parents and families? And we really kind of focused on that.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, at least as it relates to education policy, which is the idea of retention. Mm-hmm. So you begin the journey pre-K or K, depending on which state you're in, and the objective is to get to being a better than a below basic reader at the end of third grade. And a lot of kids don't make it. And so, states like Florida, Mississippi have a retention policy that's, and I'm not kidding, retention policy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of states start on that journey and they get about halfway down the road and they go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. People are going to be yelling and screaming at me, and I'm a politician. I don't like that. So they move away from it. And that's pretty common. And so why is the retention policy, as you deal with a comprehensive literacy effort, why is retention so important, Dr. Wright?
Well, I think it sends a very powerful message to across the state, quite honestly, about the importance of the policy. It's, no, we aren't kidding. We are serious about this. We're serious about the fact that we want all children reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. And here's what we're going to do to support children. Here's what we're going to do to support teachers. And here's what we're going to do to support family. And I think it conveys that seriousness of the importance of learning to read on grade level by the end of grade 3. And, for me, students don't need another year of third grade. And that was a message that we conveyed loud and clear. Any child that got retained, they already had that didn't work. So what were we going to do differently for these children that were retained in third grade that still were struggling with reading? And so we really leaned in very heavily to research-based interventions for those students. We trained teachers around those interventions, but likewise, those children that were moving to fourth grade, even through the retention law, if there was a good cause exemption, those fourth grade teachers also needed additional help because they were then getting some children that were still reading below grade level. So you had to take it, to me, it was taking it very seriously. We as an agency really focused on prevention and intervention. And when you've got assessments being administered beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, you're able to grab those kids at any given point in time that are really struggling and then see what is it that they need. So by the time that they reach spring and they take that statewide assessment for the first time, so our law is different, I think, than other people, because everybody takes the third grade assessment. And if you don't pass it, you get 2 additional opportunities to take that test before a decision on retention is actually made. But during that time, teachers now have the list of children in front of them, as they've had all year, who they can get extra help to before they take it the second time, and additional help before they take it the third time. So it's the idea is to meet the needs of children where they are and ensure that we've got kids passing the third grade assessment.
So a follow-up question. When we implemented our version of this in Florida, it came as a surprise to some that the state was actually implementing this. I would have thought it had been kind of topical, but there was, maybe we didn't do as good a job of communicating. How did you guys communicate this policy? Because it's pretty provocative. I mean, it's easy just pass kids along and next, no one's held to account. No one gets blamed if you just pass a kid on. But the tragedy unfolds later in life when you're a 10th grader and you're reading at a 3rd grade level. Everybody points figures at the people way back when. So how did you communicate this policy to give people a sense of urgency, both in the classroom and in the schools and in the community and parents, that this was a new policy that was really focused on these struggling readers?
Well, the first thing we did, and Dr. Burke can tell you a whole lot about this, the literacy team was sent out across the state conducting parent nights for just this very reason. We wanted the communities, we wanted the parents to know exactly what the components of the law were and exactly the fact that retention was actually in the policy. We also established a website for parents so the parents knew where to go to get information. We put out a ton of press releases around the law, what were the components of the law. And the other part of the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, which was really beneficial, required all schools to send a letter home to parents at the beginning of the year for every K through 3rd grade student that was struggling in reading. But it wasn't just a Carey struggling in reading letter. It was Carey struggling in reading, and here are the specific strategies we are going to use to help Carey. And then the 2nd quarter, another letter went out if I was still struggling, the 3rd quarter, the 4th quarter. So the law really required us, which I think is fantastic, to keep parents informed all the time, that throughout the entire year. We also developed a lot of resources for them to use as well. We had a family success guide, for English language arts and mathematics. I mean, we often find ourselves sitting in a room like, what else can we do? What else can we do? How else can we communicate? And then getting the feedback, as Kymyona just said, from the teachers and principals and supervisors, and most recently even the students, about how this was going, and making sure that we were in touch with the people that were having to deliver on it, and making sure that there were no surprises when spring came.
Kymyona, there are states that have embarked on this retention policy, phasing it over a period of time. Tennessee and Michigan come to mind. There may be others that are now considering backing away. Can you, if there's anybody on the call from Tennessee or Michigan, could you make the case of why it would be important to stay the course?
Oh, sure. Because you don't want social promotion to creep back in, which is, that we've talked about before, just passing students along, not knowing if those students are ready as they enter 4th grade and beyond. The texts become increasingly more complex. They rely on the foundational skills that they learn in order to be able to use that and translate that and transfer that to new types of text. But I want to say this to teachers. When we first started with this law and it was passed, our 3rd grade teachers were terrified. Mm-hmm. Because it is known widely just as a 3rd grade law. Then our 3rd grade teachers were saying, okay, what's going to happen if my students fail, if a lot of my students fail? I want to make the case that this is not just a 3rd grade teacher's responsibility. And when you're adopting laws that are comprehensive, like Tennessee has done, right? Like Michigan has done, all of these supports are in place as soon as students enter kindergarten. So if we're going to do this thing right, we're going to make sure when students enter those doors at 5 years old, that we are identifying students who may have reading difficulties, that may be at risk for those. And then we're going to do something about it. So it's this entire approach that we are supporting students, parents, and families throughout their kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade years. So when they get to 3rd grade, then it's not a surprise. And it's also not just for a 3rd grade teacher to say, now I have to begin, teaching children how to read. So the law is designed for this. So we'll always say that implementation is key. And also a part of that implementation is going to be communication. You can't wait until the year of the retention policy going into effect to say, well, oh yeah, we have this retention thing going on. My daughter, Kirsten, is 16 now, junior in high school, and she was a part of the 1st cohort. She was in the 1st cohort of students in Mississippi that took the 3rd grade assessment for promotion in 2014, 2015, right? So we had maybe a 2-year runway to let all of our stakeholders know, and then for your state chiefs, also for your district superintendents. I always say your agenda reflects your priorities, right? And so in state board meetings, we were talking about literacy, right? We were encouraging district superintendents to talk about literacy, make sure that you have an amendment in your parent handbook. So all of those things go into communication, because when people feel that they have not had a heads up, that they don't know, then it's easy to try to just kind of go against something that you really don't know a lot about. So communication is going to be key to that.
We probably should have started with this, which is to give, I'm not sure, doctors, which one you want to be the one that does it, but who wants to brag on Mississippi? We haven't really talked about the actual results of this comprehensive strategy, which is pretty amazing. And it's surprising. I brag on it all the time. I'm not, but this world of nerdy education policy and NAEP scores and stuff isn't like topical around kitchen tables across America. But tell everybody what the result was of this comprehensive strategy and where Mississippi stands today to build on the success that you all built.
Well, we were really incredibly proud when the 2019 NAEP results came out. And the beauty of the National Assessment of Educational Progress is it's the only test that is given to all states in the nation. So you really get a chance to see how you fare against others. And in 2019, keep in mind that Mississippi has the largest amount of poverty in the nation. And in 2019, our fourth grade students were #1 in the nation for our gains in fourth grade reading and fourth grade math. Our eighth grade students were #3 in the nation for their gains in eighth grade math and #4 in the nation for their gains in eighth grade reading. And then when 2022 came out, let me back up to 19, but a stat that I'm very, very proud of that often gets overlooked in 2019, our children in poverty, be they Black, white, or Hispanic, outperformed all of their counterparts nationally. So Mississippi's children who live in all this poverty outperformed other children in poverty around the nation. The same thing happened in 2022. Our children in poverty once again outperformed their counterparts. And so even though that most every state took a dip, I think the reason Mississippi's dip, if you will, was not as significant. In fact, one of them was not even statistically significant, was because of the foundation. By this time in 19 and 2022, we'd been at it since 2014-15. So we'd been at it a number of years with our teachers and with our students and with our families, so that everybody knew exactly what we were all about. And that was making sure that children learned how to read and read well by the end of third grade.
And Mississippi's per student funding has got to be like the top 3 or 4 in the country, right?
No, it's not. But
I didn't know that. So money isn't the only thing that matters. I'm surprised.
No, it doesn't. And I've got to say that, and our current governor will tell you, and even our former governor, Governor Barber, will tell you that that's the one thing that he said about me talking about money. He goes, Dr. Wright, you don't hear her talk about inputs as much as she does outputs. And I think that's really true. It's what we were given and what the agency then decided to do with the funds that we were given. And I think the legislature each year, Governor, you would appreciate this. When I went across to the budget hearing, I told them about what their return on investment was. And we talked about return on investment all the time. You gave me $15 million for this. Here's what we did with it. You gave me this amount of money in early childhood. Here are the student results you got from it. And so as our scores started to increase and increase, then they knew my whole presentation to them was, here's the return on investment. Before I even ask you for a dime, here's the success that we've had. And I think it's not always about money. It is about what you do. It is about selecting the research-based interventions, the research around the science of reading, the research about whatever it is that you're looking at, and then implementing it and implementing it well. And then being responsive and listening to your teachers and your community say, what else can we do for you? And that was one thing that, we're always saying, what else can we do for you? What else do you need from us? Because we wanted to build their capacity to be the best that they could be at their respective sites.
Yeah, I think the mantra is that you fund your priorities first.
That's correct.
And in Mississippi, making sure kids are grade level readers at the end of third grade, irrespective of life circumstances, is the priority. And so you fund that first. And that, that goes a long way because you guys built a great strategy and everybody had buy-in. And so I'm glad. I mean, again, it's okay to brag a little bit. And you guys, I thought you were going to brag without me prompting you, but
I'll do it. I know what you're looking for, Governor.
nothing
I know
wrong
what
with it because it does shatter a lot of myths.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
used to whisper, trust me, because Florida was on this list as well when we had the 50th graduation rate. You don't want to hear people whispering, thank God for Florida or thank God for Mississippi. And no one does that anymore, at least as it relates to kids' reading ability. And you guys should be proud of that. So one way to sustain these reforms that are comprehensive and long lasting is to validate it with significant research. And Marcus Winters has done some research that's about the retention policy in Mississippi, comparing students that were retained to students who were close to below basic readers, but were allowed to go on. And Dr. Wright, you want to give us kind of the lowdown on this new study that's recently been released that kind of validates what we've been talking about with based on pretty solid research?
Absolutely. It's at a Boston University and their policy center there. And it really does validate the retention portion of the law. And by following the cohorts all the way through, it showed that there was no impact on attendance, meaning the children didn't stop coming to school or because of being retained. But the other stat that I think is really critical is that it did not impact the identification of special education students. And that is a huge finding because a lot of times children that are struggling in reading, they'll probably say, oh, they probably just need special ed. No, actually, they just need to be taught how to read. And I think that's a key thing. We don't always need children to be in special education. We need them to be in general education, receiving these amazing teachers and amazing resources around what research has to say about teaching reading. And the other part that really was very marked, if you will, was it demonstrated that substantial and sustained improvement in literacy outcomes for those students who were retained. So by the time they were in 6th grade, they had significant gains by that time. So I think it's a great way to validate exactly what we were doing and hopefully put to rest the questions around retention.
Great. Dr. Burk, the argument against this policy where states have implemented, there's only a handful, is that the NAEP scores is not a great indication because it doesn't include the kids that were retained. You're taking that cohort out of the equation. Tell us about the winners, research as it relates to the longitudinal study of that and the other elements that disprove that idea. Because I've heard that quite a bit by people that are opposed to ending social promotion.
Yeah, well, I'll say this, especially in 2019. So I'll just kind of start with that year. For those students who were 4th graders in that year who took NAEP in 2019, and that's when we became the only state with the statistically significant improvements, that was the 4th grade group who in their 3rd grade cohort, over 95% of those students actually were promoted to 4th grade. So I'm going to say this again. When we first started with our promotion retention policy for 2014, 2015, we had about 85% of our students who were retained under the policy with the assessment score. At each year, we had more students who passed the assessment, meaning fewer students were retained because we had better prepared students because they were, taught how to read. We had better prepared teachers to receive those students. So by the time these students got to 3rd grade, 95% of those students went on to 4th grade for 2019, which means that those students who scored very well in 2019, that was 95% of their class. So there was no, just an effort to hide kids or to be able to keep kids back and not test those students. So those students tested. And you would think, well, now we're in 22. So this is also, now we're in even years. So we had odd years, now we're in even years. And for the first time, I think it's important to note that in 2019, for the first time, Mississippi tied the national average in fourth grade reading. And even amidst the pandemic, this is the first time that Mississippi is now above the national average. We're at 217, the national average is at 216 for fourth grade reading. And so I think that it does show, once you teach students foundational skills, and once you prepare teachers to be able to support students in that way, then that is what's going to be sustainable, not, making sure that these just kind of one-time efforts are done, but really this state-led, statewide approach to supporting students, whether they transition or they're transient students that go from one school district to the next. We have the same standards, the same expectations for students. So it is a statewide expectation. So, and to your point about our statistics, yes, we went from 50th to 29th in 2019, and now we are 21st in the country in fourth grade reading.
Yeah, and the winter's research suggests that the kids that were passed along, that were slightly above where the threshold was, they didn't do as well as the kids that were held back by the sixth grade, which proves the point that, over the long haul, the strategies that were put in place with the retention policy yielded a really good result. So again, kudos to you all. So where to from here? You've got, and by the way, for folks that haven't used the Q&A, a lot of people have, and we'll get to it after these final comments. Where to from here? What would be, Dr. Wright, what would be the 2 or 3 or 4, you can give as many as you want, things that states should be doing now that are on this journey? And frankly, what should Mississippi and Florida do? Because, resting on your laurels, or other states that have shown success by this, what's the next iteration for states? I view this as kind of a continuum of reform. And if you're beginning the journey, there's things that you need to do. If you're along the journey, you can't stand pat because atrophy sets in. So give us some advice for states that are beginning the journey, and give us some suggestions on states that are along the way.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, you can never let up. I mean, I think that is that I can't say that enough. You cannot take your foot off the pedal with this. You cannot be diverted from this. You have to have a laser-like focus on a statewide initiative around literacy. And it's more than just a focus. It is really the funding. Governor, you brought that up. It's got to be well funded. You've got to have professional development. You've got to pay for literacy coaches. I mean, we could have put a coach in every school. They were so popular. You've got to have money to develop resources for teachers to use. You've got to take a look at teacher licensure. Are teachers coming out of our educator prep programs? Are they getting what they need? Because it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, to be quite honest with you, that parents and students had paid all this money for a 4-year education, and yet when they arrived in schools, they weren't prepared to teach the science of reading. And so the state had to come back in and pay even more money to make that happen. So I think our educator prep programs need to be preparing our teachers in order to know how to teach the science of reading. I think the retention component, needs to be included in that. I think the research that has been conducted right now is sufficient to let us know that it actually works. And I also think you need to be thinking about, this 3 queuing system, and I'm going to be the first one to say it does not work. There is no research behind that. And I can tell you that our literacy team, we just had a huge session in Alaska. They flew to Alaska to do an entire session on their reading conference that they had, and it was standing room only. And they did a really good job of showing teachers exactly what are the components in the science of reading that all kids pre-K through grade 3 at a developmental way need to know and be able to do. And I think that you've got to be committed to this work. You've got to make sure that you've got the talent, like Dr. Burk and her team, inside the agency to lead this work, but you've got to be responsive to the districts because they're the ones that are boots on the ground. They're the ones that have to do this in the classroom. That's where the magic takes place. The magic takes place in the classroom. So you've got to make sure that you are providing your teachers what they need to build their capacity, that you're providing the administrators what they need in order to properly support those teachers. But it takes a constant effort. And I don't think that you can never back up because each year what's happening, you get a new crop of kindergartners and the next year you get another crop of kindergartners and parents. I had a researcher say one time, parents are sending you the very best they've got. They're not keeping the good kids at home. And so parents are depending on us. They trust us with their little ones. And it's on us then to make sure that we follow through and do what's right for them in terms of making sure that they know how to read well by the end of grade 3.
Dr. Wright, do you have any editorial comments on schools of education and what they need to be doing?
They do need to be re-examining those 12 credits for those elementary people. They do need to be ensuring that they're teaching the science of reading. We know whole language does not work. We know balanced literacy does not work. We know that the science of reading and the research behind the science of reading works. And that's really what our educator prep programs really need to be focusing on, so that their professors know how to do it. Because that's the other thing that we did when we had our professional development. We opened it up to all the professors at our universities that taught all of these early lit classes. And they could come and learn as well. So everybody's got to be on point where this is concerned.
Dr. Burk, you got any closing comments before we open it up for Q&A?
Sure. I want to say one more thing about the study. You always hear people say about the retention component, how it may negatively impact Black kids, Black and brown kids. But from this study, it showed that the students who mostly benefit from this extra year of ensuring that they were ready before going to 4th grade was Black and Hispanic students. So I just want to say to anyone who's, at least read our the article that we co-wrote, but then also this study, make sure that you not just look at the policy brief, but also look at the working paper to find out how, just this comprehensive effort can also benefit your Black and brown students. So I guess my final words would be, the first thing is be transparent. Be transparent, even if you don't have all the answers. You cannot leave people hanging when they're calling, trying to get answers. Be transparent, especially just have a strong communications effort with that. Monitor your progress. One of the things that Dr. Wright was able to leverage is that we partnered with Florida Center for Reading Research and Rail Southeast to do a study. A few years after we had started our implementation, they did a study, looked at the professional development that we were utilizing or training teachers on and the coaching in schools, and we're able to show that the coaching along with the professional development greatly improves student engagement, teacher competencies and those things. So we're able to say, again, here is a report that says the return on your investment, that it's working, what we're doing is working. So monitor your progress so that you can leverage that for additional funding, and then also to continue the buy-in with the law. Hold those accountable. Mm-hmm. It's not just teachers, it's administrators who are also leading this effort in their buildings. It's district superintendents, it's state chiefs, it's all of us who are responsible for ensuring that everyone that is impacted by this law gets what he or she needs. And then I want to end with Senator Belt from Illinois said something on a call one day, and he said, we should just start from the student and then work our way backwards from there, right? Keeping the student at the center. As adults, we have our feelings about retention or our feelings about certain things, but what is truly best for the student? Start with the student, work backwards from there. And with the literacy law, we know there are going to be some schools that say, oh, well, these things are happening. We're already doing that. But the problem is that they're not happening everywhere. And we want to make sure that these best practices are happening everywhere. And for many states, the law gives us the teeth to be able to do that and to leverage that.
Can I just add one thing, Governor, before we go on?
Please.
And that is, you have to send a message of high expectations across the state that all children are capable of doing this. And I think that that I can't say enough about that. You know, you hear the term, as well, you know, Governor, the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Who said that? Who said that?
Who said that? Who said that? I bet somebody you know and love said that. But it's so true. I mean, if we're not expecting all children, regardless of their circumstance, to be able to learn and read at a high level, we've got to be telling kids that, because I'm a firm believer that children they will do and can do what you tell them they will do and they can do, and support them getting there. So that is a constant message that came from the State Department, is that all kids are capable of this. And I think we have to believe that. We have to hire people that believe that, and we have to transmit that to the children that are in front of us.
Great. So Megan, you want me to do this, right? I'm taking charge. I don't know if you were supposed to, but I'm now in charge. So don't even try to take it away from me. First, to Andorra, we're going to put this online so that other people can learn from, all the learnings that these two incredible public servants have shared with us today. Dr. Wright, question.
Sure.
How did Mississippi develop the passing score for promotion? It's always a challenge to put the cut score in the right place, because that's another place where you can, you can play like you're doing the right thing and then lower the cut score to the point where it's irrelevant, or you can maybe raise it too high to create another problem, which is that you end up not gaining the kind of political momentum to be successful. So how did you come up with that?
Well, the law originally placed the cuts. We have a 5-level system. 5 is advanced and 1 is the lowest. And the law initially said they just had to score above a level 1 in order to pass. And I remember going back across the street in 2016 and saying, this isn't high enough. Proficiency is at 4. So we really need to raise the bar on this. And I said, give the field time, give them 3 years notice, but we need to raise the bar, and it needs to be passing at a 3 or higher in order to pass to 4th grade. So we raised the bar after we'd already started with a low bar. And I was blessed that I had 2 ed chairs at the time that were so supportive. And so we said, starting in 19, that's when the higher bar, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Well, that did not happen. We did not have all of these children then being retained. What we found happening, because all of our teachers had stuck true to teaching the science of reading, teaching children, grounding them in this, so that by the time that even 2019 came, we had almost as many passing that year as we had the year before with a lower bar. So it's possible, and you need to set, back to my high expectations, you need to set very high expectations for children and adults.
Dr. Burk, you spoke about literacy coaches being one of the integral parts of this comprehensive strategy, and that was in Mississippi was hired at the state level, I assume. Tell us more about that. Did you hire coaches to teach teachers how to teach reading that were local to the school districts, known in the school districts? Or what did coaching look like for teachers?
Yeah, so we adopted what's called an educator in residence model. So with the number of pens that a state agency is allowed from the legislature, and the expectation that we would hire 75 coaches, we partnered with our local school districts, even the universities, to hire coaches that were considered kind of on deployment from their schools or districts. So although they remained an employee of their school district, we had an MOU with those school districts, and we sent the funds for their salary and fringe benefits so that they can be on deployment from their district and work for the state agency. In our MOU, it was just understood with those school districts that, of course, agreed to partner with us. That, for example, if we hired a Carey Wright in Jackson School District, then we would send her salary, which means that they could hire someone else to teach her 1st grade class, and she would be on deployment to us. But it was also understood that we would evaluate the coach, that we would place the coach. So we had a very transparent model of the fact that we would place our coaches in our lowest performing schools. So what did the districts get for partnering with us? It was that then Carey would be able to provide professional development, and some support to their local school district, but they understood that just because we had their coach, that it did not mean that that coach would be coaching in their school district. We were We looked at the average of 2 years of ELA third grade data, and we placed coaches in our lowest performing schools. So with that, we were able to have our cadre of coaches and place them where we needed to be. So what happened was the word got around that this idea of coaching and the way in which we had trained our coaches at MDE with the instruments that they were using and the support that they were giving was such a great thing. There were other districts saying, we want to get an MDE literacy coach. And I would have to say, well, your students would have to not perform well. So that's not the route you want to go. But then they would say, well, we have funds, can we hire our own coach and you all train them? So we created modules at the state agency to train those who were considered school coaches or district coaches who were paid for by their school or district. And we were able to multiply our efforts in that way. So now we had other coaches who weren't MDE coaches, but they were following the same protocols, or they were using the same instruments. And what helped us a lot with this effort is the science of reading training, because we had to have this common language for what it meant to teach reading. And then our coaches could go in and help those teachers translate that theory into practice in their classrooms. Because think about it this way, if there's no training, I can be a coach and go into a school in South Mississippi, another coach can go to North Mississippi, and those theories or ideals of how to teach reading might be completely different. So the coach would have to then start with, educating them on what the science of reading was. But as they went to training, the coach said, okay, I know you got the theory, so now let me help you actually translate that into practice into your classroom with real kids.
Dr. Wright, does Mississippi dictate a specific set of curricula and offer resources, or
No.
I mean, how do you adhere to the science of reading?
Well,
curriculum is teaching something different.
Well, we do put out an approved list. So let me say that. And we have really started to make sure that the districts are aware of what our high quality instructional materials list looks like, our research-based intervention list looks like, and all that is very transparent and on our website. So we adopted standards. Now, that is one thing that we expect all districts to implement are the Mississippi College and Career Ready standards. That's a non-negotiable, because our assessment in the spring is based and aligned to those set of standards. But if you want, we will advise districts on which materials we consider to be aligned to the science of reading, and definitely those that are aligned to our standards, making our high quality instructional materials list. But we can't dictate to districts what materials to purchase.
May I add something? I'm sorry,
please.
may I add something to that, Governor? I think that's why it's extremely important for us to ensure that our school boards are educated on these things. They're the ones who are putting the stamp on the purchasing for the school districts. So we have a lot of conversations with teachers and administrators, but those who are making these decisions at the local level, they should also be informed about what the science of reading is, what the criteria are that they should be looking for in the curriculum that's being purchased or assessments that are being purchased. And I have gotten more calls lately from school board members across the country, from state board members across the country, who are now saying, I need to know this for myself. Like, I can't rely on someone else to tell me. We need to learn more about what this is because we're making these decisions.
So this is a pretty provocative question that comes up quite a bit. At least it did. I don't know if you see the tire marks on my forehead a long time ago when we implemented our version of this, where the self-esteem of children was considered that it would do damage if you held kids back. So the question is, I appreciate the fact that including literacy-based promotion communicates the seriousness of the law and holds teachers, schools accountable in some ways. However, the National Association of School Psychologists and other organizations have published position statements against grade retention based on the limited research completed, and because some of the research we do have indicates negative outcomes for individual students who've been retained. How do you reconcile utilizing grade retention as a strategy to light a fire to move towards the science of reading, with research suggesting being retained leads to potentially harmful long-term effects for individual students?
Well, I think we have just discussed the most recent piece of research out of Boston University that says, that there's a positive impact on children that have been retained in terms of their academic gains and the fact that they're not being identified for special education and the fact that they're continuing to come to school. I am a firm believer that you've got to make sure that you're addressing the whole child. But the bottom line for us in education has to be also that we are ensuring that every child that leaves third grade is leaving third grade reading on grade level. I mean, reading is the gateway to everything. And those children that are retained definitely need more assistance. Otherwise, they wouldn't be retained because they would be reading on grade level. And I'm not saying discount that, but you've got to do both and. It's not either or. It's not just either promote them and so they feel good about it or retain them so they feel bad about it. It's both and. You retain children who are struggling with reading. The research is very clear on that now. And then you also then continue to provide them the skill sets that they need in order to become readers that will open up gateways throughout their entire career.
Dr. Burk, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll say that the self-esteem is also very low when a child cannot read to pass his or her driver's license test.
That's exactly right.
Or those that I've experienced sitting in my classroom when I was teaching middle and high school who were struggling readers and they wanted to act out instead. They wanted to be put out of class instead of being asked to read. I have experienced that personally. And so there are films out right now around reading and all of that that really show those who are adults who talk about how they struggled, and we can talk about prison rates. I mean, we can talk about all of those things as it relates to students not being able to read when they enter into a stage where there are going to be teachers who did not go through the traditional route of teaching. They did not learn the science of teaching reading or how to teach children how to read. They are content specialists. They teach chemistry. They teach biology, they teach math. So when they're faced with a child in their classroom who cannot read their content specific word, it's not that they don't want to do anything. They're not trained to know what to do. If there's a 16-year-old sitting in your classroom and he's struggling with root words or suffixes or all of those things that come with content area vocabulary. So I think that when we think about what it does to self-esteem, then we have to think about what it does for a child's trajectory of their lives if they are not prepared to engage in school the way that they need to because they're a struggling reader.
Thank you. Who was the most critical stakeholder in this movement for the state of Mississippi? How were they leveraged and included throughout this change management process?
Well, it's not just one group. I think that's the part about a comprehensive policy. I mean, I think that the legislature, of course, crafted the law, but then you're talking about teachers and administrators and students and communities. It's everybody needs to be involved in this. It's not something that can just be, I don't know, just focusing in on one particular group. And I think that's where the communication strategy is so important because everybody needs to understand what's going on. And, Kymyona used the word transparent. We are very transparent about what's going on. We're very transparent about our data. We're very transparent. We publish our data all the time so that anybody in the state knows how children are doing in Mississippi. But it's not just one group. You've really got to get all groups engaged in this because in the business community in particular, I mean, I think that's another group that, because they're relying on our products, if you will, by the time they walk across the stage in grade 12. So it's everybody that's involved in this and not just one particular group.
So here's an interesting question I haven't heard before. Why wait until third grade to retain a student?
Well, I guess that really depends on local, there's every district, I'll just stick with Mississippi, every district in Mississippi has its own retention policy. And so there are children actually that are retained before third grade. The law just addressed third grade simply because of the whole idea of reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. But there are districts that do retain children as early as kindergarten.
So we're nearing the end of our journey here. For those that ask questions and we didn't get to you, we will figure out a way to do so. I think we have your contact information. We'll answer all these questions. The last question is not really a question. It's a comment from Kelly Butler. And she says, love seeing this band back together. Your Barksdale Reading Initiative friends appreciate this partnership, and thanks to ExcelinEd for providing Kymyona a national platform to make these successes happen in more states. CAB, what do you think?
That's our friend Kelly Butler from the Barksdale Reading Institute. She's amazing, and she's been a great friend and a great partner this entire journey. Can't say enough about her.
Well, I think the lesson here is that the strategies need to be comprehensive. You need to have political buy-in. You need to be transparent with teachers, with principals, with school administrators, and most particularly with parents. And if you can get outside, so-called outside folks, because like the Barksdale Reading Initiative, there are many other philanthropic organizations around the country that could play a really constructive role, being an advocate and a partner. And if you stick with it over the long haul, and you fund the things you want more of and less of the things you want less of, you can get the kind of results that we've gotten in Mississippi. And for that, we're really grateful. And I know a lot of people around the country are looking at the Mississippi experience and saying, why not us? Why the hell? Why, if Mississippi can do it, why are we sitting around doing nothing? And I'm too old to be patiently waiting for states to get off their duffs to move in this direction. I hope that this hour conversation will provide some incentives for people to really make a difference in the lives of the next generation. And Doctors Wright and Burk, we really appreciate you sharing your expertise, and God bless you for doing it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.